Welcome to our explainer on how a surprisingly small island nation managed to build the largest empire in human history. And the crazy part? They never actually planned to do it. It's an absolutely fascinating story, and it completely challenges everything we usually assume about how global superpowers are actually made. You know, we tend to think of empires as the result of these grand, highly centralized master plans, right? But today, we're diving into the historical reality of Britain's completely unplanned rise to global dominance. Let's get right into it.
To really wrap our heads around the sheer scale of what we're talking about here, just look at this number, 458 million. By 1922, the British Empire governed a staggering 458 million people. To put that into perspective, that was roughly 1 in every 4 people alive on Earth at the time. 1 in 4. And they were all answering to a rainy little island in the North Atlantic. The empire stretched across nearly 35.5 million square kilometers, covering roughly a quarter of the Earth's entire landmass.
But looking at that terrifying scale, we really have to ask ourselves, was this global domination the result of some deliberate, centralized master plan? I mean, did British monarchs and parliamentarians sit around a giant map in a smoky room in London, plotting world domination over centuries? Well, the surprising answer found in historical sources is no. No, they didn't.
The 19th century historian J.R. Seeley actually hit the nail on the head when he summarized this paradox. He suggested the empire was basically built by mistake. He famously argued that Great Britain seemed to have acquired its massive territories in, and this is a direct quote, a fit of absence of mind. Now, while earlier historians kind of used this idea to paint the British as reluctant civilizers rather than aggressive conquerors, modern revisionist history has taken a much closer look at what this absence of mind actually meant in practice. And that brings us to the core definition we're going to be exploring today, the idea of the accidental empire. This concept totally challenges the myth of a predatory master plan. Instead, it reveals this chaotic, highly volatile recipe of rogue merchants, regional power vacuums, and literally just historical accidents. It was an incredibly organic, contingent phenomenon where the state itself was often dragged kicking and screaming into expansion, mostly by the unstoppable momentum of private economic interests.
Part 1. Traders before soldiers, the corporate conquest. So, long before the Royal Navy was out there planting flags all over the globe, it was actually private joint stock companies setting up shop.
Now, the English expansion strategy wasn't exactly original. They systematically copied the Portuguese maritime model of establishing these fortified coastal trading enclaves, which they called factories. And this kicked off a really predictable, self-replicating cycle. Step 1, private merchants go in and establish a commercial footprint. Step 2, their commercial greed inevitably sparks local conflicts, or maybe they just get caught up in regional instability. And Step 3, the state is ultimately forced to send in troops to protect those commercial assets, which leads to total territorial consolidation.
The conquest of India is actually the perfect illustration of this cycle in action. Honestly, it wasn't some London-planned invasion at all. What happened was the mighty Mughal Empire suffered a huge succession crisis and collapsed, which created a massive power vacuum. So, the opportunistic British East India Company just stepped right in to protect its investments. Following the Battle of Plassey in 1757, the company literally looted the Bengal treasuries and then used that enormous wealth to fund a mercenary army of native Indian sepoys. It was quite literally an empire on the cheap. You had a private corporation essentially buying a subcontinent using the subcontinent's own money. They practically handed the British state an empire built without a single dime of direct taxpayer expense.
Part 2. Funding a global reach, the fiscal military state. Because as you can imagine, to survive global wars and actually protect these exploding corporate assets around the world, the British state had to rapidly evolve its financial machinery. I mean, just look at the sheer financial muscle behind this expansion. The national debt absolutely exploded during the wars with revolutionary and Napoleonic France, jumping from £239 million to a whopping £861 million. But here's the clever part. Because of institutions like the Bank of England, Britain was actually able to manage this massive debt. They could raise capital at impressively low interest rates. So this huge credit-driven state apparatus allowed Britain to simply outspend its rivals. They poured millions into Allied subsidies to help crush France, and in doing so, they fundamentally shifted the empire's geographic focus, away from the Atlantic, straight over to the East Indies and India.
Moving on to Part 3, the illusion of accident, strategic administration. See, while actually acquiring these territories was incredibly reactive, governing them was a totally different story. It was a highly coordinated operation. And this is exactly where the whole idea of an accidental empire starts to get a little complicated.
We really need to contrast the haphazard, messy nature of how these lands were conquered with the strictly intentional, highly strategic way they were legally administered. Just because there wasn't a centralized plan for conquest definitely didn't mean there was an absence of systemic intent when it came to control.
And this brings us to a fascinating concept called strategic legal pluralism, which has been extensively studied by historian Christian Bursett. Britain very deliberately denied English common law to newly conquered territories. Instead, they strategically applied totally different legal codes depending on what they wanted from the colony. For example, in Quebec, they retained French civil law specifically to prevent French Catholics from joining the American Rebellion. Clever, right? In Bengal, they codified Hindu and Islamic law to make tax collection easier, without actually giving the native population the rights of Englishmen. Meanwhile, North America got English common law to help foster a vibrant commercial economy. So by deciding exactly what kind of law a colony received, London was dictating exactly what kind of colony it would become. They kept them politically dependent and economically subordinate. Let's be clear, that part was absolutely no accident.
Part 4. Rapid and unplanned collapse. All right, let's fast forward to the 20th century and see how the empire's ultimate end perfectly mirrored its completely chaotic beginnings.
So, following the utter economic devastation of the Second World War, Britain suddenly found itself drowning in debt and facing these rapidly rising nationalist movements. Their retreat from global dominance was breathtakingly fast and honestly deeply disorganized. The most tragic example of this, without a doubt, is the 1947 partition of India. British administrators literally subdivided the subcontinent and withdrew their forces in a mere 73 days. 73 days! Without any coherent strategic exit plan, they left behind this devastating legacy of massive violence and structural instability. Essentially, the empire was shed with the exact same lack of a centralized blueprint that characterized how they acquired it in the first place.
Part 5. Modern Accidental Empires. Parallels today. So, why does all of this historical context actually matter to us right now? Well, because the exact same mechanics of the accidental empire are actively shaping our modern geopolitical world today. History isn't just a bunch of dates in the past. It's a blueprint for understanding current events.
If we compare the British East India Company's trajectory to modern transactional statecraft, we start to see this fascinating and, frankly, kind of dangerous feedback loop. The core pattern is still there. Scattered, unilateral economic interests inevitably demand state military protection. Let's take a look at how geopolitical analysts are actually applying this framework to the world right now. Now, to really unpack this framework, geopolitical analysts point to some incredibly diverse contemporary examples. And we're just looking at the mechanics here, not endorsing any single political narrative. For instance, George Soros has argued that the Eurozone's structural design flaws accidentally forced Germany into the role of a creditor empire, sort of shifting economic burdens onto peripheral debtor nations without any sort of deliberate master plan. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, author Gershom Gorenberg describes the early West Bank settlements as an accidental empire, where paralyzed government policy was essentially overtaken by unauthorized grassroots actions that eventually forced state integration and military protection. Finally, the Center for Strategic and International Studies notes that when modern U.S. foreign policy pursues transactional, unilateral deals, like, say, trading aid for exclusive mineral rights, it risks creating these scattered global assets. And just like the British Empire centuries ago, securing those localized assets ultimately demands a unilateral military footprint. So, we're going to leave you with this provocative thought. As modern nations continue to spread their financial footprints all around the globe, are they unknowingly writing the exact blueprint for the next accidental empire? Are today's superpowers truly following some grand master plan? Or are they, much like the British centuries ago, simply reacting to the unstoppable momentum of their own investments? It's definitely something to keep in mind the next time you're reading the news. Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the history behind the headlines.